What is up, you guys? Welcome back to Twink Revolution. I'm Sam.
I'm Gian. And today we've got a very special guest. We have Jason Prado with us. Hi, Jason.
Hi there. Great to be here.
So we're a slick show around here, and we wanted to do a lot of research. And it turns out the best source of information on Jason is actually KeyWiki. I guess they're anti-communist online warriors who spend a lot of time doxing people who've ever RSVP'd to an event held by any left-wing organization or something. So according to KeyWiki, Jason is a Four Loko enthusiast, a member of the Democratic Socialists of America San Francisco chapter, and a kind of tech rabble-rouser. Is that all fair, Jason? Have they doxed you successfully?
Yeah, I think those New Zealanders pretty much got it right.
Yeah, I didn't actually realize that thing's run by a weird New Zealand guy.
Really?
Yeah, KeyWiki, Kiwi.
Oh, okay, that kind of checks out. Sorry, I apologize for my countrymen. So yeah, we're super excited to have Jason on. He's done some interesting stuff in his time. So actually, one of the funny things on the KeyWiki one is you were involved in Proposition C with this is the voter proposition in San Francisco, which allocates basically money from giant tech companies to solve homelessness in San Francisco.
That's right. I kind of campaigned for it, knocked doors, tried to raise awareness among the tech community about it.
Yeah. So it the KeyWiki claims that you were the one who convinced Marc Benioff. Is this true?
I've never talked to Marc Benioff aside from talking to him on Twitter a few times. The background there is that, there's this billionaire guy, Patrick Collison, is the founder of Stripe. He reached out to me one time asking, hey, could I come to a DSA San Francisco meeting, general meeting? And I replied, sure. I mean, you'll be a little out of place, but I'm happy for you to come check it out. And then about a day or two later, it came out that Collison had made this very large, multi-$100,000 donation against Prop C, kind of funding the anti-Prop C tech cabal. Oh. So I got pretty annoyed at this and replied to him hey, actually, it's better if you don't come to this meeting next week. I went to bed and I woke up the next day and I was still pretty pissed off. So I decided to organize some fellow tech workers to go stand outside of Stripe's headquarters and pass out flyers to workers explaining, hey, it sucks that your boss is doing this, that he's funding, the anti-homeless services brigade in San Francisco. Here's ways you can organize against it. You can have general meetings. You could have a strike. You could start to unionize to stop your awful boss. And I took some photos of this and posted on Twitter, and it went a little bit viral. Then Marc Benioff noticed this, and he had decided to be the pro-homeless people billionaire in San Francisco. So he retweeted me saying, thank you, Jason, for standing up to the Collison or whatever. And this became a viral meme of its own. A few dozen people in DSA replied, thank you, Jason, to that tweet. And to this day, anytime I do anything remotely praiseworthy or appreciable, somebody replies, thank you, Jason.
Well, thank you, Jason, for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
That it is a pretty cool story. That was a story Prop C in general, made, some waves in terms of maybe the first wave of what tools do cities have at their disposal to take the giant pile of venture capital cash that's flowing into your community and then flowing straight out to the Cayman Islands or whatever, and do something with it. What have you sort of seen with the development of that? I feel like it sort of fell off a lot of people's radar.
Yeah, I haven't been following it that closely for the past few months, but it is still in court, basically. California has some very complex tax regulations. Basically, it's very hard to pass a revenue tax anywhere in California due to some very activist conservatives who have really locked down the tax code. So you have to pass the taxes with certain kinds of ballot measures, and there's a court case going on about whether or not it was the right kind of ballot measure, essentially. So those funds are mostly frozen. We have not yet seen the positive effects of Prop C, but it did pass with a pretty strong majority.
That's awesome. So one of the other things you've obviously been very involved in, you were in the tech industry and trying to sort of organize within that. Have you sort of seen what have you seen going on there? It feels like there's been some sort of campaigns popping up here and there, and some really great efforts along the front. But tech workers are sort of not known for the most being the like class conscious group of people, right?
Right. I would say we've come a long way as a community. This isn't the first time there's been a flare up of activism within white collar workers in the U.S. or within tech workers even, or even within Bay Area tech workers. But it is the latest iteration of it, and I'd say it started kind of in 2016 around the 2016 election, of course, and it's gone some interesting places since then. The Google lockout and then Google campaigning against Maven is probably one of the high points of our achievements. Service workers at lots of tech campuses have unionized successfully and won like industry defining contracts for their unions, and that's something I was more personally involved in. And then recently, we've actually seen unions forming at tech companies themselves. So Kickstarter is probably one of the most visible ones. Lots of media is very closely aligned, and lots of digital media office places have been unionizing as well. So we're seeing a wave of organization within like white collar tech media jobs. But it's still very early, and no one's really cracked the big companies in terms of like really successful organizing there, or straight up unionization at a place like Amazon outside of, say, the warehouses.
So I mean, given that like tech companies were some of the first of the the white collar workers to do the like shit, this Rona thing's getting real. Go hide in your overpriced apartments and work from home, and a lot of them are now announcing. Twitter just announced like work from home forever, if you want or whatever. What do you think that means for I don't know, union organizing? Like it feels a little hard to have the like hush hush water cooler talk over your company Slack integration or whatever, right?
Sure. I mean, there's a couple of different forces kind of competing here. One is that as soon as you're not going into an office and you're remote by default, you start to not care if the worker is in the Bay Area or in the United States, or went to the fanciest institutions and whatnot. So you can start looking around the world maybe and finding cheaper talent, and that's going to be a big. We can talk more about this, but that's going to be a big like sea change basically in the tech industry over the next several years. I would say it's definitely possible to organize online. Like we've seen digital media unions where most people have never met each other outside of Slack or the internet. I think the way I've heard it phrased is that anywhere you can build an authentic connection with people, you can organize there. And before some of my first friends I ever made in the world were on the internet, being a person who grew up on the internet. So I believe pretty strongly you can make authentic connections on the internet.
Do you think that the unions or like groups trying to unionize in tech are actually aware of this change in like the industry and what it means for organizing, or do you think they're too new right now and they just don't recognize the problem while it's already happening? Like, what is your thoughts on that?
I think it's too new at the high ends. We've had it so good for so long that it's going to take a real punch in the face to make tech workers, like high tier tech workers, really understand that capital applies. The forces of capital apply to us as well, and we are subjects of capitalism, just like other workers. Shit might hit the fan for us later, but it will come for us. I think the probably more valuable organizing opportunities right now are kind of the other parts of the hierarchy of the tech industry. Obviously, the people who actually have to go to offices, or rather not offices, but warehouses right now, are people working at Amazon warehouses, or people who have to drive and do gig work for Uber and companies like that. Those are really fertile areas for organizing, I believe. But there's a role to be played for desk workers as well. And then, of course, there's hundreds of thousands of people who work at desks across the world who do things like content moderation for Google and Facebook and other companies. Basically, have to be rooted in the U.S. for just time zone reasons or kind of cultural knowledge reasons. That's a very fertile ground to organize. And I think some of the bigger unions that have organized office workers before are going after them. What's I think new and was definitely shocking to me as I learned about this over the past month or two is that the upper echelons of tech jobs are quickly getting outsourced. And I think that's a trend that people don't quite know about yet. The FANG companies, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, they're not exactly doing this, but one tier below these companies, I'm hearing that they're trying experiments in outsourcing senior engineering roles even to places like Poland or Beijing or parts of China outside of Beijing, even where an engineer might cost $25,000 a year rather than $400,000 a year, which is what it costs in the Bay Area, total cost of hiring somebody. And these experiments are going surprisingly well, is what I keep hearing. And so now they're like every team or every part of a company has this choice, like, do we hire one engineer in the Bay Area that we can see face to face? We could have seen face to face before the quarantine, or do we hire 3 in Poland or 6 in rural China? Not rural, sorry, but just China outside of Beijing. And when I've been an engineering manager before, and if somebody gave me that choice, like deal with the shitty time zone, but you get 6 times as many talented engineers, that's a pretty easy choice. And that level of talent and skill that we have just kind of believed was uniquely Bay Area feature for so long has migrated out. So there's now many engineers across the whole world in many areas with very different costs of living that are ready to be hired on Upwork.
So I mean, it is interesting that you mentioned, say, like the fully landed cost of an engineer in the Bay Area, something like $400K. It's an obscene amount of money to anyone looking in, and like objectively, yeah, it is. But to the extent that like companies can do math, they hire a worker for $400K because they can make, I can't remember, I think Google, the average earnings per employee is something like $2 million or something in that ballpark. I can't remember the exact figure, right? But like, but people sort of hear that number and they think these aren't workers. Like this is some sort of, this is the petite bourgeoisie or something, or they must be doing something to represent a class interest, which is sort of true, right? In some sense. I mean, it's always like this weird line. It's hard to get tech workers to think, like, it's hard to get somebody earning $400K or whatever to think of themselves as an exploited worker. And yet I think many of them will find out pretty damn soon, right? I mean,
totally. I mean, definitely, I understand the viewpoint that we shouldn't be crying for these well-compensated workers. And look what these high wages and all this venture capital has done to the Bay Area. Look at rent prices and the cost of living here and the gentrification that has been the result of global financial capital finding this weird talent pool in this one area of the world. So maybe there's going to be some positive effects of that being spread out to the rest of the world and taking some of the pressure off the Bay Area. But at the same time, like, these workers are going to find that they've grown accustomed to this lifestyle, or that the cost of living here just is high and rents are not going to magically go down overnight as they start having a harder and harder time finding jobs. And I think it'll be a rude awakening for people, necessary, but a rude awakening that tech workers are actually workers despite getting paid quite well.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the other sort of problem one has in the analysis of this is that tech workers, particularly in the Bay Area, really fall into a very specific, like, progressive politics. Wear your Notorious RBG shirt to work, and be a complete person. Get involved in all these sort of projects that are effectively like very liberal in their character. And so they can seem overtly hostile. I mean, they can seem like the establishment, like the core of the Democratic Party, right? I mean, this is sort of like they're the main constituent. Like, high income will max out donations to any shitty progressive candidate. Like, do you think there's going to be like actual organizing barriers there? Or have you sort of found that people are pretty quickly, once they sort of cross the divide from like, oh wait, I am a worker, or these are workers, that you can actually get together and start a project together?
Tech workers love Bernie. That's one thing that's a little bit hopeful. People who worked at Google, Facebook, Amazon, engineers, or desk workers, donated to Bernie just en masse. And that was really positive to see. I do want to address the term tech worker, because, when you think of tech worker, you think of someone like me, like educated, making too much money, skilled, whatever. But most people who work in tech aren't like this. Most people who work in tech are, if you view the whole gamut of it, then they're working in a Foxconn factory, or they're working on a tech campus as a service worker, or a product specialist, customer service person, content moderator. These jobs far outnumber the number of highly skilled and highly paid software engineers. But of course, this is coming for software engineers too. And software engineers hold like a kind of outsized place in the mind of the media. The people like reporters love talking about what tech workers do. So I think they're a big prize, basically, getting them on their side. So I worked for the Bernie campaign briefly for about 6 weeks towards the end of the campaign as an engineering consultant, basically, to try and take some of my Silicon Valley skill set to DC and make the databases work good or something. And we were thinking about bringing on another consultant like me. So I posted in I used to work at Facebook, so there's this Facebook group. I posted in that group saying, like, hey, I'm going to DC to work on the Bernie campaign. Does anybody want to come with me? And within an hour, like 24 people had DM'd me to say, like, I would do anything. Like, I'll do it on the side. I'll do it for free. Like, I'm really passionate about this. So there's definitely a core of tech workers who are interested in socialist politics, not just progressive politics.
And kind of I guess a loaded question, but like if so, we have plenty of listeners in the Bay Area. Say if some of them happen to be highly paid software engineers or hourly precarity workers for a tech company, where would you be putting your efforts?
That's a great question. I mean, that's kind of what I'm taking a pause on my life to figure out what to do. I'd been working full time in the tech industry for about 10 years at 3 of those FANG companies, I guess. And then left to go work on the Bernie campaign, and then that ended. And now I'm kind of taking some time off to look around and try and figure out like what are options for people with tech skills who are interested in no longer selling them to the worst people on earth and maybe doing something good with them. And I don't have any great answers yet. So there's plenty of like Code for America type things that people could look into. Those are like kind of working for municipalities or states, building better services, very important, and everyone's applying for unemployment. And those people are definitely hiring and love that kind of work. You also have a lot of money, so you should give that to socialist organizations and the actually good progressive politicians, but there's not that many of them, of course.
Yeah, so I'm definitely fascinated to hear a little bit more about your time in the Bernie boiler room. How you feeling on that or about that in retrospect, and what was it like?
Yeah, it was a really great experience. So I had been getting pretty disillusioned with my tech job, as you do, and resolved to leave sometime this year. And then around January, I was particularly fed up, and I'd been volunteering for Bernie on the weekends, organizing a door knocking canvas in my neighborhood, and spending more and more time on that. So I was like, well, maybe I can just leave my job and volunteer full time. Just go sit in the Bernie campaign office here, like every day. There's just super volunteers who just do that and do whatever is necessary for the campaign locally. So I decided to do that. Left my job and was volunteering, knocking doors, calling people, whatever, just kind of trying to make sure that Bernie won San Francisco and California as hard as possible. And but I also reached out to a few friends who worked in the actual campaign and asked, like, hey, is there anything I could do to help with some engineering skills? And one of them bit and kind of said, hey, we need some help with the data team. We have a whole lot of really brilliant political data scientists, but not that many data engineers, because you only really need a data engineer for like the biggest campaigns and the something that's running for a really long time. Most campaigns are small and short, but every 4 years is a presidential campaign, basically, that actually lasts a year. Some people from the Bernie campaign reached out and said, would you like to come here as a consultant, one of those awful political consultants, except instead of whatever they do, I was doing software engineering. So I was very happy to jump on that. I haven't really done data engineering before, but engineering is what I hoped. So I jumped on that, spent about a week here in San Francisco learning as much as I could as fast as possible. And then I went to DC for the weeks leading up to Super Tuesday. And worked out of the actual Bernie office, and it was really awesome to see, 100, 200 people working just around the clock, like working harder than I've ever seen tech workers work, for sure. And a lot of passion and a lot of optimism at that time. Throughout 2019, I did not allow myself to feel any hope. Hope is bullshit, and I'm too smart for that. Then I do admit in like the month or so before Super Tuesday, I actually started to feel some hope. We had some really good polls. We like crushed Nevada. We won. I think we're the only campaign to ever win the first 3 primaries. It felt for a moment inevitable. On the campaign, there was kind of a rule against even mentioning the general. If anyone even kind of mentioned the possibility of being in the general election, there was immediately just like, and just, you just had to stop. But I even heard some whispers of like, well, should we build the software this way in case it goes, in case we need it in the general? And then I was there the night of Super Tuesday and flew out the next day. So we weren't super happy about the outcome of Super Tuesday, but it didn't feel like it was over yet. We didn't have the week of compounding media narratives just saying, Bernie must drop out. It's like the people have spoken or whatever. So my hopes were crushed, and I've learned the lesson yet again for the millionth time, and to never, ever, ever, ever feel hope.
Did you have?
I'm sorry. I think wait. Did you have dinner at my place? Was that Super Tuesday or Super Tuesday 2? I remember like the night after.
I think that was Super Tuesday 2 we talked.
Yeah, that was grim.
Yeah. Yeah. Just in the 8-day span.
Yeah. Yeah, well, how quickly hope fades. Because I think like we were doing some like a little bit of light gloating, or like some like, oh come on, like look at this is unstoppable. Yeah. Oh, it was stoppable. Fuck.
Did you have any like inclinations while you were working in the campaign that it was shifting off course or going a way that was kind of counter to the narrative that a lot of the Bernie crowd was kind of pushing? I mean, they're still pushing it. I saw an article saying Bernie proved that this class organizing thing worked, but he lost. So it's like, was it actually able to attract all of the working class? And it clearly didn't. But did you have any feelings throughout the campaign where you're like, oh, maybe we're going the wrong direction? And just, I don't know, what's your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. I mean, I definitely wasn't privy to the strategy. I was a consultant, not a staff member. I wasn't in the staff union and whatnot. So I will say that the data people knew the score pretty much continuously. They were not diluted. They didn't think like, oh, Super Tuesday, is a victory or something. We individually maybe convinced ourselves of that. But like the actual people who know the numbers had a real solid head on their shoulders collectively, I would say.
That's interesting. I mean, because that was sort of I guess the campaign was relatively silent, right? I mean, it was on whether we are quote winning or not. But yeah, that is sort of interesting to think that the optimism outside maybe was enthusiasm, right? I mean, not so much well-reasoned optimism.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's also good to see that the people who actually make these decisions were doing so with the correct data and maybe the correct strategy. I generally think really positively of the campaign leads and all the staff. We'll probably spend the rest of our lives trying to understand just like what went wrong. Did Bernie go too woke? Is the class project possible in America? The only narrative I can really like zero in on is really resonating with me is that like the media just fucked us so hard, like continuously throughout the whole campaign, calling on Bernie to drop out when he was leading a year before, and then kind of just allowing this ridiculous narrative to pass by that people who supported Bloomberg and Buttigieg and Biden, who were just like at each other's throats days before, could just coalesce on Biden, Joe fucking Biden, as the hope for America. And then just pretend that he is a viable candidate for all the reasons that are unspeakable in popular media. So we're not gonna be able. I guess I've lost my faith in the electoral route until we have more power within the media sphere. I think we need to go back to focusing on a working class organization project and hope that national electoral politics are downstream of that.
So you won't be volunteering your services for the Biden campaign?
I will not be doing that. I mean, if AOC runs for president in 4 years, I am a sucker. So I will probably, if some candidate like that arises, I will fall for this again, even though I'm saying now I'm too smart for that.
Well, okay, yeah. I'm always right. I've used this anecdote more than once on the podcast, I think, but it's Gore Vidal talked about why he kept a portrait of John F. Kennedy, who he knew personally, on his study wall, and he's like, it's a reminder to never get fooled again. So maybe we'll get you a Bernie portrait.
There's still posters all over my house.
Yeah. There it is.
So yeah, you're also in DSA SF, which, I mean, you're well aware DSA has a lot of mixed feelings in the media and in the, I'll say, like, liberal left sphere. What's your experience been like in DSA, and like what have you been working on in the organization?
And if you could give a list of all the names and addresses of your co-conspirators.
They're all on KeyWiki.
Oh, thank goodness.
Cool.
Yeah, we do joke sometimes that if we're curious, like who is the leader of another chapter, we just check KeyWiki because there's no national database for DSA.
Yeah, it's really nice of them to do your data, outsource your data collection and curation for you.
Right. So I only became a socialist in 2016. I was raised in a Trump voting family, and then moved to California and became big Libby Lib. And then in 2016, I started to kind of look around and think like, hey, this doesn't all seem to work right. And this Bernie guy seems to be making a lot of sense. Maybe I'll like support him. But it was like, but Hillary, it's great if like a woman wins or whatever. That's all I'll find too. Then the day after the 2016 election, I had what I thought was the only reasonable, rational reaction, which is to realize that some core axioms that I'd held for a long time were just wrong. So I should reevaluate them and find some new core principles, or like come up with a new understanding and analysis of the world. And so literally the day after the 2016 election, I like Googled democratic socialism because that's what Bernie was. And I'd seen DSA on Twitter. So I was like, okay, I'm just joining this. And lo and behold, like 2 weeks later, there was a DSA San Francisco first meeting, getting the chapter off the ground. So that's my only experience with the left, is kind of, I've volunteered with labor unions and bumped into lots of leftists in the past 4 years, but it's not like I've been a part of another organization that is healthy. So I don't know what a healthy organization would even look like.
The sort of, I think some of the thing that gets lost on people is maybe the chapter versus like DSA national distinction. Because I mean, I was a member of DSA SF for a little while. I may be again, I like to say. I'm not currently. But like, there's sort of the excesses of maybe some of like the national conference, which, were well publicized, no clapping, scent free, yada, yada, yada. This shit just sort of is almost self-parody at some point, right? Is not always mirrored in local chapters, although sometimes, right?
Totally. Yeah, it's hard to talk about what DSA actually is, because the way it's represented in media has all the biases and clickbaitiness that we expect. So it's a very large organization. It's growing very fast since the Bernie campaign. We've had a few big spikes, like the 2016 election, AOC, Bernie, a few things, and we're picking up like 500 members a day for a few days over the past few weeks. So we're at 66,000 members nationally, which is really cool to see. But we are. It's a hodgepodge, right? Like we call it a big tent organization, but like the tent is very, very large.
Unkind to tents, perhaps.
Yeah, and then circuses are held in tents, of course. And then there's also DSA Twitter, which gets an undue amount of attention, because the people on Twitter, the intersection of the people on Twitter and the people actually doing organizing projects is fairly small. There's some for sure, and we should listen to these people some, but it's a lot of like weird shit posters who maybe know a lot about left drama or even about Marxist texts, but these are usually not the people actually doing stuff in the chapters where things actually does get done. Wow, how'd you pick up on that? No, podcasting is part of the war.
It's praxis.
Yeah. So I think I've been fairly fortunate to be a part of DSA San Francisco, which I from my experience, I have to say is a model chapter of a socialist organization. It's strongly democratic. The membership truly leads and is empowered. It sucks to be a leader in the organization. Every leader is burned out after their 1-year term, essentially, because it's such a difficult administrative task, not to even mention the political difficulties. And that's kind of how you want it, right? You don't want like leaders seizing power and like steering the organization too much. You want like the intelligence is actually at the leaves of the organization. Our chapter also has a pretty strong bias for action, which I think is something you see in the more effective chapters across the country. We actually run candidates and win. We run ballot measures and win, like we've done several times now. We organize new labor unions in new workplaces, like Anchor Brewery and Tartine most recently, and hopefully some more if quarantine doesn't continue to get in the way. So that's been a pretty excellent experience for me. I would love to see DSA nationally focus more on projects like that. Even having DSA endorse or really throw resources at Bernie was a kind of a fraught decision, I think, because it intertwines DSA with the Democratic Party, which is stands in the way of us in a working class movement, essentially. But at the same time, I joined DSA because of Bernie. There's almost a direct causation there. So like I do have a soft spot for doing that kind of work. But I think what we're going to need to do is see a lot more involvement with the working class, to get rid of this divorce between the left and the working class. And the only way to do that is to go into workplaces and organize them. So I would love to see DSA just triple down on that, which I do see like signs of them doing. There's this emergency workplace organizing committee going on right now around essential workers and just trying to throw all the resources we can at organizing new workplaces that are affected by quarantine.
That's really interesting. I mean, it was always a double-edged sword, I guess, of people being brought into DSA by the Bernie campaign in 2016, and in that I can't remember who it was. It might have been Amy or somebody talked about like people who supported Bernie as a good like maximally liberal candidate, as in he was a spectacular candidate. Even if you actually if you had no interest in the working class except a sort of a philanthropic urge towards them their suffering, he sort of ticked all the boxes in terms of like his political history and integrity, and therefore you could be led to believe that that's what socialism is, right? And I mean, I feel like there's plenty of people who maybe joined DSA and learned, they did the work. But like, they just in terms of like, I guess, interacting with other people who have different politics, you're going to start like maybe learning.
Yeah, it's a lot of people who have been socialists for like a year calling people who have been socialists for 6 months liberals.
Yes. Yeah. And to the extent that, it definitely pulled the organization in some odd directions, at least to say like, what is the coherent strategy? And I think my personal critique of DSA has always sort of been the Big Tent thing in terms of like the sort of horizontalist impulse of to be able to speak with one voice, right, is actually I feel like quite important. But like that just makes me a tanky, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think DSA's role might be to be the shitty 1 million person organization. And maybe it'll be on some other organizations and some other leaders to find a way to be the better, smaller organization. For now, that's like the best we can do for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you Googled Democratic Socialist right after the election and found DSA. We're hoping people, after sort of trauma or stress in their lives, just Google Twinks and find us. And so that's
I guess y'all aren't gay space communism, technically, right? That's not your tendency.
No.
I mean, I know I kind of like space. We're pretty gay. Pretty communist, I guess. Yeah, so yeah, technically.
Some is less than the whole of its parts.
We did spend like almost an hour just talking about perfume once as well on a podcast. So like, I guess there's luxury there. Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, we're close.
I do thank y'all for introducing me to Amy Therese. Before I heard her on your podcast, I only knew that she was
cut his mic.
Yeah, she who shall not be named, and you get canceled even if you see her see her tweets without blocking her.
Yes,
but now I've heard her speak.
Yeah.
Do you mention that in your DSA meetings? Or? I joke.
I feel like that's almost the disconnect that's kind of healthy. Is I suspect that most of the people who turn up to an in-person DSA meeting have never heard of Amy Therese.
Certainly not. Yeah. And they haven't even heard of Chapo Trap House, which is something I only heard of after I'd been in DSA for a year at least.
Wow.
So the podcast discourse takes up way too much time, and I think we're starting to get bored with it. We were starting to get bored with it before quarantine, and now there's literally nothing else to talk about or think about.
Yeah.
So there's been a flare up of it, but I hope that we move past ever talking about podcasts again. No offense.
Except this one. Yeah.
Except this one.
It'll be, the sort of 15 minutes at the start of every meeting will just be devoted to a collective review. Yeah, recap of the last Drink Revolution episode, and that's it. It's the only acceptable podcast discourse.
Then we can focus on Elon Musk discourse instead.
Yeah. Have we figured out how to say his baby's name yet?
I have no interest in that.
It's literally pronounced. I have no interest in that.
Yeah, that's right. Whatever Azalea Banks tells me to pronounce, I will do that.
Perfect.
We don't stan Elon. We're not.
No, I'm ready for us to be done with him. He's like a pretty smart, extremely energetic guy who just has no taste, absolutely no taste.
Yeah, I think that checks out. And then I guess that makes Grimes a really sort of energetic musician who has no taste in men.
Yeah.
So what are the projects that DSA is working on right now after post Bernie? Like, has there been a discussion of what to do after the campaign and where to focus efforts, or not so much? Or is it more decentralized focus?
That's a good question. And I think it is fairly decentralized at the moment, and also everyone's kind of in emergency mode for the quarantine.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen at the national level some really cool efforts around organizing essential workers and a restaurant organizing project, which is near and dear to me because most of my family works in restaurants, and kind of my first jobs are all in restaurants, and they're all closed at the moment. They're all laid off at the moment. So that's a little bit heartening. We're not going to be doing a national electoral campaign for a while, and that's pretty good because it will kind of free up some space to do other things. In DSA San Francisco, we're still doing electoral campaigns. Of course, we have two candidates here, including Shahid Buttar, who's running against Nancy Pelosi, and that's an interesting race to watch at the very least. But then we're kind of trying to focus on reacting to quarantine as best as we can, and that still looks like labor organizing. There's still people in workplaces reaching out to new workplaces and trying to get them organized. There's also, people love having a discussion about like what is mutual aid and what is not mutual aid. If I don't know, like, is this charity, is it mutual aid? And we'll denounce each other if we answer differently. So that's still happening, but we're also just doing the things too, which is nice. So like, the city supervisor that we've elected here in San Francisco early in the quarantine somehow acquired like 40 gallons of hand sanitizer when nobody could find any. So we got a bunch of plastic bottles, filled them with hand sanitizer. And like the only part I did was I volunteered to drive them around and drop them at community centers and stuff like that. So that's like propaganda of the deed type thing or whatever. So we're doing that kind of mutual aid stuff under COVID-19.
And DSASF particularly has had some good opportunities to sort of put a good foot forward in those regards, right? And I know there is some criticism of some of this stuff just in terms of like the question, is it overtly political? But I think if people are sort of realistic about the idea that like, well, the term socialist was sort of unthinkable to use not so many years ago. And if you're essentially turning up and DSASF, they are visible. I mean, they turn anything you go to. There's a small but vocal, DSASF contingent. So things like when there were wildfires, right? Huge numbers of, N95 masks being distributed in conjunction with other organizations in the Bay Area. But really, sure. DSA sort of sat at the heart of that distribution machine, at least, things like that. And even earlier, the much controversy over things like brake light clinics.
Uh-huh.
And I think one could have sort of mixed feelings on any one instance of those, but it is sort of interesting to see that project being like, can you just get people to maybe stop and have a conversation in the course of, have a conversation about like, hi, we're not just a bunch of like, charity do-gooders maybe, but we have a political agenda.
Right. If the worst thing we accomplish in this like 5 to 10 year period and the minor resurgence of socialism we're seeing is that people are no longer afraid to use the term socialist, then that's an accomplishment. I feel like we have to kind of at least like make that much progress before other options are available, or we'll end up in, maybe I'm wrong, and we'll end up with like people like Elon Musk calling themselves socialists, and the term just won't mean anything the way progressive means nothing soon. But that's, I think, the only move we have at the moment.
Yeah, no, I think we've definitely destigmatized the term for liberals. I think you definitely have plenty of people whose politics do not have anything to do with anything is maybe a benevolent concern for the working class, calling themselves socialists. But hey, I guess it's all it's learning, right?
Yeah, I think there just was no left here for most of my life in America, or if it was so beneath the surface that it never really made an appearance in my life. So at least we've changed that.
Yeah, it was hard to avoid, at least, perhaps.
Our jackets look really cool.
Yeah, no, those are some cool jackets. I sort of, as I said, I'm not currently a DSA member, but that might be the one thing. Swag is a good way to lure me in.
Indeed.
So you've done a lot of organizing and stuff, and I've noticed for a lot of the labor organizing right now under Corona, there's been almost complete media blackout on like all these organizings, which is I see more and more on like Twitter, but on like news sites, there's no coverage at all. Being in organizing and like involved with like labor organizing, like is this an issue you often deal with? Is just the media blackouts, and like how do you overcome that obstacle to make the public aware that you're actually doing something?
Right. Well, if you look at who owns the media, I guess you can't be surprised at the fact there's a media blackout of most any interesting worker action. We have seen some actual successes there this year. I think maybe we're too in this bubble, but my impression is that there actually was a mainstream story about like Amazon Instacart strikes on May 1st, for instance. And that at least points in a promising direction. I think there's a lot more strikes going on, a lot more labor actions going on than actually make it into the mainstream media. I think we have two options. We can either change the media or just work around it. And I don't really see us changing the media. Maybe Means TV or like kind of left-leaning publications will actually gain some steam. But it's, even in the age of the internet, it's just exceedingly hard to do that. It doesn't seem possible to make money doing that also, or to be sustainable, which was probably a really good move on the part of the media to make content free, so that only ideological or well-funded actors can fund it. And now we're kind of stuck in that position. Or the other thing is we just have to work around the media, and that means an organizing campaign. You don't rely on the newspaper, you don't rely on the mass text, you don't even rely on the phone bank. You rely on what the Bernie campaign called relational organizing. It's something they borrowed from the labor movement. So if you ever downloaded the Burn app, you maybe were asked to add a list of your friends who might support Bernie, and then it kind of nudged you to make sure they support Bernie, make sure their voter registration is up to date. That's a tactic straight from labor organizing, where you have a graph of coverage of a workplace, rather than like kind of a hub and spoke model. You have you find who people trust, you find the leaders in an organization, and you turn them, and then they bring their people with them. So that's the model we have to go with. We just have to do it at the scale of, I don't know, the whole fucking planet to actually accomplish anything now.
The House of Un-American Activities was very good at this as well, in terms of
turning people.
You find one person, you tell me, who do you know, who trusts you? Yeah, it's going to
be
do
they pay well?
Graph.
Do they pay well? I'm unemployed.
Yeah, we're going to weaponize some big data for. Although KeyWiki honestly has got us beat there. Sadly, they've already moved in on that grift. What hope do we have? So if people want to maybe learn more about what you're learning as you go along and figure out what you're going to spend your time on next, where should they find you? You're on Twitter, right? Jason P. Jason. Is he?
Yeah, I'm Jason P. Jason on Twitter. I don't really have anything to plug because I'm like just a guy. I don't have a book or anything. I do write a newsletter occasionally on Substack. So if you look up venturecommune.substack.com, that's my weekly to monthly newsletter.
Hell yeah. Oh, actually, yeah. Jason has written some really great pieces, and I'm kind of kicking myself that we didn't ask you about some of those earlier in the piece. But what we will do is we'll link those in the episode description, because, you should definitely check out Jason's writing. I do have one more question, just because, many of our listeners bemoan their, they spend all day online, they're single. Is it true you met your wife by sliding into her DMs?
Oh God. Did you ask her if you could ask this?
No.
Oh, I'm gonna get in trouble. Yeah, I met my wife on Twitter. She had a rose emoji in her name, and at the time everyone was putting rose emojis in her name. And she lived in London, I lived in San Francisco, and we just started chatting on Twitter and became friends. And then a few months later, we're on a panel together talking about the tech industry, and unexpectedly hit it off. And then she moved to America and we got married.
There you go. See, so there is hope for you. Just keep posting. Never stop posting. You'll post your way to happiness and marital bliss.
Yeah, 13 years on Twitter. It has destroyed my brain, but it has enriched my life in one way.
Aw. Jason, thank you so much for being here. Check out Jason on Twitter, Jason P. Jason, also Venture Commune on Substack, and we'll link that in the episode description.
Thank you so much. This is super fun.
Thanks.